What happens when a calm, friendly daytime talk show suddenly turns into a moment so tense that the entire studio falls silent? What happens when a guest who was expected to laugh, smile, and promote her latest project instead decides to confront one of the hosts on live television? Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe to The Truth Narrator, like this video, and comment right now. Because what you're about to hear feels less like a TV interview and more like a scene from a movie. The studio lights were bright, almost blinding, reflecting off the polished table where the hosts sat with their cue cards and coffee mugs. The audience was cheerful, clapping and smiling, expecting another normal episode filled with jokes, light conversations, and celebrity stories. When Jennifer Aniston walked onto the stage, the audience immediately stood up and applauded. She smiled, waved, and hugged the hosts one by one. Everything looked normal. Everything felt normal. But sometimes the most uncomfortable moments begin in the most ordinary way. Joy Behar smiled the way she always does. A polite smile, but with a sharpness behind it. The kind of smile that can either welcome you or warn you. Jennifer sat down, crossed her legs, and adjusted the microphone on her dress. The cameras zoomed in. The audience slowly became quiet. The interview began with simple questions: her new project, her career, her life, her experiences in Hollywood. Jennifer answered calmly, professionally, the way a veteran celebrity always does. She had done hundreds of interviews before. Nothing about this felt new to her. But then the tone of the conversation changed. Joy leaned slightly forward, looked at Jennifer, and asked a question that sounded polite on the surface, but had something else hidden inside it. Something sharp. Something personal. "So Jennifer," Joy said, tilting her head slightly, "you've spent decades in Hollywood, and people still talk about your personal life almost as much as your career. Do you ever feel like your fame came more from your relationships than your talent?" The audience made a soft, uncomfortable sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to feel that something had shifted in the room. Jennifer didn't answer immediately. She smiled, but it wasn't the same smile as before. It was a controlled smile. The kind of smile someone gives when they are choosing their next words very carefully. "Well," Jennifer said calmly, "I think people talk about what the media tells them to talk about." Joy nodded slightly, but she didn't back off. "But you can understand why people might think that, right? I mean, the headlines, the interviews, the very public relationships." Now the audience was completely silent. Jennifer looked directly at Joy. Not smiling now. Not angry either. Just very focused. Very calm. And sometimes calm is more powerful than anger. "Joy," Jennifer said slowly, "do you think a man with the same career would be asked that question?" The audience reacted immediately. A mix of claps, surprised laughter, and a few shocked faces. Joy blinked, clearly not expecting that response. The other hosts shifted slightly in their chairs, sensing the tension building like a storm cloud over the table. Joy tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come on. I'm just asking what people think." Jennifer didn't look away. "No," she said softly. "You're not asking what people think. You're asking what you think. And there's a difference." You could feel the air in the studio change. The friendly morning show atmosphere was gone. This was something else now. Something real. Something uncomfortable. One of the other hosts quickly tried to change the subject, asking about Jennifer's new show, but Joy wasn't finished yet. And Jennifer, it seemed, wasn't either. "I just think," Joy continued, "that when you become a public figure, your life becomes public conversation." Jennifer nodded slowly. "Yes, that's true. But there's a difference between public interest and personal disrespect." The audience clapped again, louder this time. Joy crossed her arms slightly. "Are you saying I'm being disrespectful?" Jennifer paused for a moment. You could see her thinking, choosing her words carefully again. This wasn't an argument. This was something more controlled, more precise. "I'm saying," Jennifer replied, "that for years, I've been asked questions that my male co-stars never get asked. About marriage, about children, about relationships, about aging, about all the things that have nothing to do with my work. And after a while, you start to notice the pattern." The audience was fully on Jennifer's side now. You could hear it in the applause, the murmurs, the way people leaned forward in their seats. Joy smiled again, but this time it looked different. Tighter. Less confident. "Well," Joy said, "that's the business you're in." Jennifer leaned slightly forward now, matching Joy's posture from earlier. "No," she said quietly, "that's the business the media created. Not the business I chose." The silence after that sentence was heavy. The kind of silence that only happens when everyone in the room realizes they are watching something real, something unscripted, something that wasn't supposed to happen this way. One of the hosts whispered, "Wow," under her breath, and the microphones almost caught it. Jennifer leaned back in her chair again, calm, composed, but the energy had completely changed now. This was no longer a promotional interview. This was a confrontation, quiet, polite, but very real. And the most surprising part was still to come. The cameras were still rolling, but the mood in the studio had completely changed. What had started as a normal daytime interview now felt like something much deeper, something personal, something neither the producers nor the audience had expected. The hosts shuffled their cue cards, the audience shifted in their seats, and for a brief moment, no one seemed to know what the next question should be. Jennifer sat calmly, her hands resting lightly on the table, but inside, you could tell she had reached a point where she was no longer interested in giving the usual safe, polite answers. Joy, on the other hand, leaned back slightly in her chair, studying Jennifer carefully, as if trying to decide whether to push further or to change direction. But live television has a strange energy. Once tension appears, it doesn't just disappear. It grows. One of the other hosts tried to lighten the mood. She smiled and asked Jennifer about her early days in Hollywood, about auditions, about struggling before becoming famous. Jennifer smiled again, and for a moment, it looked like the storm had passed. "Oh, those days were tough," Jennifer said with a small laugh. "A lot of rejection, a lot of waiting, a lot of wondering if you're ever going to make it." The audience smiled, some nodded. This was the Jennifer they knew, warm, relatable, honest. But Joy spoke again. "But Jennifer," she said, her voice calm but direct, "a lot of people struggle in Hollywood. Not everyone becomes a star. Do you think you had advantages that others didn't have?" The question hung in the air like a weight. Jennifer turned her head slowly and looked at Joy again. Not surprised this time. Almost like she had been expecting another question like this. "What kind of advantages do you mean?" Jennifer asked. Joy shrugged slightly. "Connections. Publicity. Being talked about. Sometimes publicity makes a career bigger than talent does." A few people in the audience gasped quietly. One of the hosts looked down at her cards. Another host looked directly at Joy, clearly uncomfortable. Jennifer didn't react immediately. She took a slow breath, then nodded slightly, as if acknowledging that the question deserved an answer, but not a rushed one. "You know what's interesting?" Jennifer said. "People always assume that success has a secret reason, that there must be something behind it. Connections, relationships, luck, anything except years of hard work." Joy replied quickly, "I'm not saying you didn't work hard. But you are suggesting," Jennifer said gently, "that my success came from something other than my work." Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Jennifer continued speaking, still calm, still controlled. "I worked for years before anyone knew who I was. I did small roles, auditions, failed pilots, shows that got canceled. I studied acting. I worked on my craft. I showed up every single day. But people don't like that story because it's not dramatic enough. So instead, they create another story. A more interesting story." The audience started clapping softly. Jennifer continued, her voice steady but emotional underneath. "A story about relationships. A story about headlines. A story about personal life. Because that story sells more magazines than a story about a woman who simply worked hard for 20 years. Now the audience was clapping louder. Joy tried to respond again, but Jennifer leaned slightly forward, and for the first time, you could hear real emotion in her voice. "Do you know how many times I've been asked why I didn't have children? How many times I've been asked if I'm lonely? How many times people have assumed that a woman must be sad if she doesn't have a husband? Do you know how many interviews I've done where no one asked me about my work? Only my personal life." The room was completely silent now. Jennifer's voice softened. "After a while, you start to realize something. People are not really interested in your work. They're interested in whether your life looks the way they think it should look." Joy looked at her, and this time she didn't interrupt. Jennifer continued, "And if it doesn't look the way they expect, they think something must be wrong. They think you failed at something. They think your life is incomplete." One of the hosts quietly said, "That's really sad." Jennifer nodded slightly. "It is, but it's also very common. Not just in Hollywood. Everywhere. Women are constantly asked to explain their life choices in a way that men never are." The audience clapped again. Some people even stood up. Joy finally spoke, but her tone was different now. Less sharp. More careful. So you think the media treated you unfairly? Jennifer thought for a moment. I think the media created a character. And that character wasn't me. It was a version of me that fit into headlines and stories and narratives. And once people believe a story for long enough, they think it's true. Joy nodded slowly. And that bothered you? Jennifer gave a small smile. It didn't bother me at first. At first, you think, that's just the business. Then years go by. Then decades go by. And the same questions keep coming. And one day you realize, maybe it's not just the business. Maybe it's something else. What do you mean? Joy asked quietly. Jennifer looked directly at her. I mean, she said, that sometimes the way people talk to women, especially successful women, is different. The questions are different. The expectations are different. The judgments are different. The audience clapped again, louder than before. Joy looked around at the audience, then back at Jennifer. So you think I'm judging you? Jennifer shook her head slightly. No. I think you're asking the kind of questions that women have been asked for a very long time. And I think no one ever stops to ask why. That sentence landed heavily on the table between them. For a moment, no one spoke. Not the hosts, not Jennifer, not the audience. The only sound was the faint hum of the studio lights and cameras. And in that silence, everyone in the room could feel it. This interview was no longer just an interview. It had become a conversation about something much bigger than one actress, one host, or one TV show. And the tension was still building. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had been said so far. It was the kind of silence that only happens when a conversation stops being polite and starts becoming honest. The audience could feel it. The hosts could feel it. And Jennifer could definitely feel it. But what surprised everyone was that Joy didn't look angry. She looked thoughtful, almost like she was deciding whether to defend herself or to understand what Jennifer was really saying. Joy leaned forward again, but this time her voice was calmer, less confrontational. You know, Jennifer, I've been in television for a long time. And part of this job is asking difficult questions. Sometimes uncomfortable questions. That's what the audience expects from us. Jennifer nodded slowly. I understand that. I really do. But there's a difference between a difficult question and a personal assumption. Joy tilted her head slightly. So you think I made a personal assumption about you? Jennifer paused for a moment, then spoke very carefully. I think you asked a question that reflects what people have been saying about me for years. And I think no one ever stopped to ask whether those things were fair to say in the first place. The audience was very quiet now, listening to every word. Joy responded, but when you're a celebrity, people talk. That's part of fame. You can't control what people say. Jennifer gave a small smile. You're right. I can't control what people say. But I can control what I accept. And what I don't accept anymore is the idea that a woman's life is only interesting if she's married, divorced, heartbroken, or having a baby. The audience immediately reacted, loud clapping, some people even cheering. Jennifer continued, and now there was more emotion in her voice than at any point before. For years, I played along. I smiled in interviews. I laughed at the jokes. I answered the same questions over and over again. Are you dating anyone? Do you want kids? Are you sad? Are you lonely? And after a while, you start to feel like your entire life is being reduced to a headline. Joy listened without interrupting this time. And the strange thing is, Jennifer continued, no one asks men these questions. No one asks a successful 50-year-old man why he doesn't have kids, or why he's not married, or whether he feels incomplete. They just ask about his next movie, his next project, his next success. One of the hosts nodded slowly and said quietly, That's true. Jennifer looked at her and smiled thankfully, then looked back at Joy. I'm not upset, Joy. I'm just tired. Tired of the same story being told about me. Tired of being turned into a narrative that I didn't write. Joy crossed her hands on the table. But you must understand, Jennifer, people feel like they know you. You've been on their screens for decades. They watched you grow up, fall in love, go through breakups. People feel connected to you. Jennifer nodded. And I'm grateful for that. I really am. But there's a line between connection and entitlement. Between caring about someone and feeling like you have the right to judge their life. That sentence made the audience go completely silent again. Joy looked at Jennifer for a long moment, then asked a question that sounded quieter, more personal than all the others. Did it hurt you? All those years of headlines and stories and speculation. Did it hurt? Jennifer didn't answer immediately this time. She looked down at the table for a moment, then back up. Her eyes were a little shinier now, her voice softer. Yes, she said. It did. I just didn't show it. No one in the audience moved. No one coughed. No one whispered. It was completely still. It hurts, Jennifer continued, when people reduce your life to one thing. When they decide what your story is without asking you. When they look at you and think, poor her, she doesn't have this. Or poor her, she lost that. And you want to say, I'm not poor. I'm not incomplete. I'm not a sad story. But after a while, you get tired of defending your own life. Joy's expression had changed completely now. She wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't challenging Jennifer anymore. She was listening. Jennifer took a small breath and continued. Do you know what the biggest misconception about me is? People think I'm always the woman who got left. The woman who was unlucky in love. The woman who doesn't have children. That's the character the media created. But that's not me. That's just a story people kept repeating until everyone believed it. Joy spoke very softly now. So who are you then? If that story isn't you, who is Jennifer really? Jennifer smiled, and this time it was a real smile. Calm, confident, and a little emotional at the same time. I'm a woman who built a career from nothing. I'm a friend. I'm a daughter. I'm a person who loves deeply, who works hard, who has been through things like everyone else. I'm not a headline. I'm not a tabloid story. I'm just a human being. The audience started clapping again, slowly at first, then louder and louder until the entire studio was filled with applause. Joy nodded slowly, almost thoughtfully. She said, I think this might be the most honest conversation we've had on this show in a very long time. Jennifer let out a small laugh. Honest conversations are usually uncomfortable. Joy smiled slightly. That's true. One of the other hosts finally spoke, trying to lighten the mood, but also clearly emotional. Well, I think a lot of people at home are probably seeing you in a very different way right now. Jennifer shrugged gently. I hope they just see me as a person. That's all. But just when it seemed like the conversation was calming down, Joy asked one more question. And this question would change the tone of everything again. She looked directly at Jennifer and said, If you could go back and change the way the media treated you, would you? The audience went quiet again. Jennifer looked at Joy, and you could tell from her expression that this question meant something deeper than it sounded. Jennifer took a slow breath, looked out at the audience, then back at Joy. And when she answered, her voice was calm, but her words hit harder than anything she had said so far. No, she said, because it taught me something very important. Joy leaned forward slightly. What did it teach you? Jennifer looked directly into her eyes and said, It taught me who I am, and it taught me that I don't need the world to understand my life for it to be meaningful. The audience didn't clap immediately this time. They just sat there quiet, taking in what she had said, because everyone in that room could feel it. This was no longer just a celebrity interview. This was something real, something personal, something that people were going to be talking about long after the cameras stopped rolling. And the cameras were still rolling. The audience was still watching. And what happened next, after the show ended, would be even bigger than what happened on live television. The show finally went to commercial break, but the energy in the studio didn't relax the way it usually does when the cameras stop. No one immediately stood up. No one started chatting like normal. The audience was still looking at Jennifer, and the hosts were still sitting in their chairs, almost like the conversation hadn't really ended yet. It felt like everyone understood that something unusual had just happened. Not a shouting match, not a scandal, but something quieter and deeper, something that felt real. Jennifer reached for her coffee cup, but didn't drink from it. Joy looked down at her cards, then back at Jennifer, and for a moment they both just nodded at each other. It wasn't a victory nod. It wasn't an apology nod. It was more like two people acknowledging that they had just had a conversation that mattered. When the show came back from commercial, the producers clearly tried to bring the mood back to normal. One of the hosts smiled brightly and started talking about Jennifer's new project again, her upcoming work, her production company, her plans for the future. Jennifer answered professionally, calmly, smiling again, but now the audience was listening to her differently. Before, they were listening to a celebrity. Now they were listening to a person. Joy spoke again too, but her tone had completely changed from earlier. It was softer now, more respectful, more careful with her words. Jennifer, Joy said, after all these years in this industry, after everything you've experienced, what would you say is the biggest lesson you've learned about fame? Jennifer thought for a moment, then smiled slightly. That fame is a strange thing. It makes people feel like they know you, even when they don't. And if you're not careful, you can start believing the version of yourself that strangers create. The audience was very quiet, listening carefully. So how do you not believe it? Joy asked. Jennifer answered, by having real people in your life. Friends who tell you the truth. Family who treats you the same way they always did. And by remembering who you were before anyone knew your name. One of the hosts smiled and said, "That's actually really beautiful." Jennifer laughed softly. "It's also necessary, because if you don't know who you are, the world will happily tell you who you are. And they might be wrong." The audience clapped again. The rest of the interview went smoothly after that, but the earlier conversations stayed in the room like an echo. Even when they were talking about movies and funny behind-the-scenes stories, people were still thinking about what Jennifer had said earlier. You could see it on their faces. This interview was going to be remembered for that conversation, not for the movie promotion. When the show finally ended and the cameras turned off for real this time, the audience stood up and applauded much louder than they usually do at the end of a show. Not the normal polite applause. This was louder, longer, more emotional. Jennifer stood up, waved, and thanked the audience. Joy stood up too, and for a brief moment, the two of them hugged. It was a short hug, but it said a lot. Not enemies. Not friends. Just two people who had a very real conversation in front of millions of people. But what happened after the show was what turned the moment into something even bigger. Clips from the interview started spreading online within hours. Short clips of Jennifer saying, "I'm not a headline. I'm a human being." Another clip of her saying, "There's a difference between connection and entitlement." Another clip where she said, "I don't need the world to understand my life for it to be meaningful." People started sharing those clips everywhere. Comments started pouring in. Some people said Jennifer was brave. Some people said she finally said what many women feel but never say. Some people said Joy was just doing her job and asking tough questions. Others said the interview showed how differently society treats men and women, especially when it comes to age, marriage, and personal life. News websites wrote articles about the interview. Social media was full of debates. Talk shows discussed the moment. Some people focused on the confrontation. Others focused on Jennifer's honesty. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. It was one of the most real celebrity interviews in a long time. Backstage, after the audience had left and the lights were dimmer, Jennifer was getting ready to leave. One of the younger staff members stopped her and said, "I just wanted to say what you said out there. It meant a lot to a lot of people." Jennifer smiled warmly and said, "Thank you. I think people just want to be seen as people. That's all." As she walked out of the studio, past the cameras, past the crew, past the posters of past guests and past shows, she looked calm. Not like someone who had just been in a confrontation, but like someone who had finally said something she had been wanting to say for a very long time. And somewhere in the studio, Joy was sitting with one of the producers, rewatching a clip from the interview on a monitor. She watched the moment where Jennifer said, "You're not asking what people think. You're asking what you think." Joy watched that moment twice, then leaned back in her chair and said quietly, "Well, that was television." But it was more than television. It was a moment, a real moment. The kind of moment that people remember because it didn't feel scripted, it didn't feel fake, and it didn't feel like acting. It felt like the truth. And people can always recognize the truth when they hear it. And now I want to know what you think. Do you think Jennifer was right to confront the question? Do you think Joy was just doing her job? Or do you think this moment showed something bigger about how celebrities, especially women, are treated by the media and the public? Write your opinion in the comments, because I read your comments and I want to know what you think about this moment. And if you enjoy dramatic, emotional, and powerful stories like this, make sure you subscribe to the Truth Narrator, like this video, and share it with your friends, because there are many more stories like this, and you don't want to miss the next one.